The fluorescent lights of the Midtown precinct cast a harsh, unforgiving glow on everything. Yet somehow, Officer Ethan Hayes' desk managed to remain in perpetual shadow. It wasn't by design, but by accumulation. Papers cascaded from overflowing trays. Obscure forensic manuals were stacked precariously beside an ancient, humming computer, and a lone, wilting plant fought a losing battle for sunlight amidst the clutter. Ethan, in his early 30s, was hunched over a stack of old case files, his glasses perpetually sliding down his nose, a disheveled lock of brown hair falling across his brow. His movements were methodical, almost ritualistic, as he sorted through the endless bureaucracy of police work. Each staple removed, each document filed with a precision that bordered on obsession. Around him, the squad room buzzed with the chaotic energy of more successful colleagues. Detectives barked into phones, officers laughed raucously over coffee, and the constant clatter of keyboards created a cacophony that Ethan, with his quiet demeanor, seemed to absorb rather than participate in. He felt the constant, subtle exclusion, not through overt hostility, but through a pervasive sense of being overlooked. When a detective needed a meticulously organized report, they'd turn to Ethan. When someone needed a particularly obscure police regulation clarified, Ethan was their man. But when plans were made for after-shift drinks, or when a high-profile case broke, Ethan remained a solitary island in a sea of camaraderie, his presence acknowledged, but rarely truly engaged with. His routine was a series of self-imposed isolations, a quiet choreography designed to minimize interaction. Lunch was always eaten alone, tucked away in a secluded corner of the precinct's cramped break room, often with a well-worn copy of a true crime novel as his only companion. He volunteered for unpopular night shifts, the graveyard hours when the station was eerily quiet. The only sounds the distant hum of the ventilation system and the soft click of his mouse as he delved into digitized cold cases. Evenings at home were spent in a similar solitary pursuit. His small apartment, a sanctuary cluttered with forensic texts, psychological profiles, and maps marked with obscure geographical data. He wasn't lonely, not precisely. He was simply alone. It was a state he had grown accustomed to, almost comfortable in, a necessary condition for the kind of deep, analytical work that truly fascinated him, the kind of work that seemed to elude his more outwardly ambitious colleagues. Ethan's physical appearance mirrored his internal world, slightly disheveled, practical rather than stylish. His uniform was always clean, but often wrinkled in places others wouldn't notice. His glasses were a constant fixture, a barrier that sometimes felt more protective than corrective. He rarely raised his voice, preferring to observe, to listen, to absorb. This quiet intensity made him easily overlooked, dismissed as harmlessly eccentric. His superiors, including Captain Thorne, saw him as a reliable, if peculiar, asset. They valued his meticulousness for paperwork, his ability to sift through mountains of data and produce perfectly organized reports, but his investigative hunches, the quiet suggestions he sometimes offered about an overlooked detail or a seemingly illogical pattern, were usually met with a polite nod and a dismissive wave of the hand. "Good job with the filing, Hayes," Thorne would say, his tone implicitly adding, "Now let the real detectives handle the real work." Ethan would simply nod, a familiar pang of resignation in his chest, and retreat to his shadowed desk. One particularly dreary Tuesday, a cold, relentless rain lashed against the city. Ethan was off duty, heading home, his thoughts already drifting to the new batch of cold case files he planned to examine. He took a detour through a quiet, residential district, a habit he'd developed to unwind, enjoying the anonymity of the back streets. As he turned a corner onto Elm Street, he saw a figure huddled under the meager shelter of a bus stop awning. It was an elderly woman, her silver hair plastered to her face, her clothes soaked through. She clutched a small, threadbare purse, her eyes wide with a disoriented, panicked look that immediately registered with Ethan. Early signs of dementia, he noted instinctively. She was lost. Most people would call 911, maybe offer a quick, hurried word of comfort. But Ethan didn't. He knew the bureaucratic labyrinth that awaited her if he simply called it in, the hours in a cold precinct, the impersonal questions. His heart, beneath his quiet exterior, was a deep well of compassion. He walked up to her slowly, his voice soft and gentle. "Ma'am, are you all right? You look a little lost." The woman startled, her eyes darting nervously. I need to get home. But I don't know where home is anymore." Her voice was a frail whisper, laced with tears. Ethan felt a pang of empathy that cut through his usual detachment. He didn't rush her. He took off his own damp jacket and gently draped it over her shoulders. "It's okay, ma'am. We'll find your home. What's your name?" "Eleanor Vance," she mumbled, her gaze unfocused. "It's nice to meet you, Eleanor. I'm Ethan." He sat beside her on the wet bench, pulling out his phone. He didn't immediately call for backup. Instead, he began to ask her about her family, her street, anything that might jog her memory. He spoke in a calm, reassuring tone, patiently repeating questions, piecing together fragments of information. He noticed the faded embroidery on her purse, a small, hand-stitched EOV that led him to try searching for a unique family crest she vaguely mentioned. Using his phone, he began a quiet search, not through police databases, but through public records and social media, trying to find a match for an Eleanor Vance in this area, perhaps with a family member who had recently posted a missing alert. It took him 20 minutes of patient, methodical searching, cross-referencing names with addresses, looking for recent photos that might match Eleanor's appearance. Finally, he found a frantic post from a granddaughter, desperate for news of her grandmother, Eleanor Vance, who had gone missing from a house just 3 miles away. He called the granddaughter, explaining the situation calmly, reassuring her that Eleanor was safe. The granddaughter, overcome with relief, offered to come pick her up, but Ethan gently declined. He knew Eleanor was disoriented and scared. He personally drove Eleanor home, slowly and carefully, chatting with her about mundane things, keeping her calm until they pulled into the driveway of a small, charming house. He walked her to the door, waited until her granddaughter, tears streaming down her face, embraced her. And only then, with a quiet nod, did he turn and walk back to his own car. He didn't linger for thanks, didn't mention he was an officer, didn't seek recognition. It was a small act of genuine compassion, done quietly and selflessly, highlighting his inherent good nature and deep sense of duty beyond the badge, a duty that extended far beyond the confines of official procedure. Ethan Hayes possessed an uncanny ability, an almost obsessive knack for noticing minute details and patterns that others simply overlooked. It wasn't a skill he consciously cultivated, but rather an intrinsic part of his being, a filter through which he processed the world. A particular way a knot was tied in a crime scene photo would stand out to him, suggesting a specific profession or habit. A subtle shift in a suspect's cadence during a recorded interrogation, a barely perceptible hesitation, would tell him more about their true emotions than their spoken words. He could spot a unique scuff mark on a shoe print that others dismissed as generic, recognizing the precise brand and model of footwear, or even the gait of the wearer. He often jotted these observations down in a small, worn leather-bound notebook, a constant companion that lived in his uniform pocket or on his bedside table. He attributed it to mere diligence, a byproduct of his anxious personality, or an anxiety-driven focus, as he sometimes self-diagnosed. He thought of it as a quirk, a personal habit, nothing more. He was unaware it was a dormant gift, an investigative superpower lying just beneath the surface of his quiet exterior. One late evening, as the precinct began to empty out, leaving only the skeletal crew of the night shift, a new batch of cold case files landed on his desk for routine archiving. They were the cases that had baffled everyone, the ones relegated to the darkest corners of the department's storage. Ethan sighed, recognizing the familiar feeling of being the last stop for lost causes. He picked up the top file, marked in bold red letters, "The Nightingale Murders, Unsolved." It was an old case, decades old, involving a series of brutal, ritualistic killings that had terrorized the city. Never solved, never truly understood. As he began to systematically review the digital copies of the crime scene photos, meticulously checking each detail for proper labeling and archiving, his eyes snagged on an almost imperceptible discrepancy in one of the images. It was a photo of a victim's living room, seemingly untouched except for the horrific crime itself. But on a small, unassuming wooden table, amidst the everyday clutter, there was a specific, odd stain pattern. It wasn't blood, nor was it easily identifiable as anything else. It was faint, almost camouflaged against the wood grain. But to Ethan's eyes, it seemed wrong. Too precise for a random spill, too geometric for organic decay. He zoomed in, then zoomed out, tilting his head. He had never seen anything quite like it. He jotted down a note in his worn notebook, "Victim No. 3 living room table. Faint, geometric stain. Check cross-referencing with forensic database for unusual patterns." He knew it was unlikely to be anything, just another obscure detail in a long-dead case. Then, flipping to a witness statement from the same file, his gaze lingered on a peculiar phrase, a seemingly innocuous colloquialism used by a nervous neighbor describing a fleeting interaction with the victim. It was a common enough phrase, but the way it was delivered, the context in which it was remembered, just doesn't sit right with him. It felt forced, almost rehearsed. He underlined the phrase in his mental notebook, a tiny flicker of disquiet in his gut. He dismissed it as a quirk of his overly analytical mind, a mere archivist's itch. The stain, the phrase, they were probably nothing, just random anomalies in a mountain of tragic facts. He was unaware, as he closed the file and slid it into the cold case archive box, that this seemingly insignificant observation was actually a dormant gift, a crucial, unseen thread in the tangled web of the Nightingale murders, a connection that would soon pull him into the very heart of the department's toughest, most terrifying unsolved case. The echo in the precinct was about to become a roar. The air in the Midtown precinct crackled with an unusual tension, a stark departure from its usual chaotic hum. Whispers echoed through the squad room, carrying snippets of an impending change. Officer Ethan Hayes, hunched over his perpetually shadowed desk, felt the shift in atmosphere like a low-frequency hum, a prelude to something significant. His fingers, stained faintly with ink from old reports, meticulously organized a stack of cold case summaries, his mind already drifting towards the complex puzzles they presented. He found a peculiar comfort in their stillness, their silent challenge. Then, the announcement came, not with a bang, but with the crisp, authoritative voice of the chief of police, amplified through the precinct's intercom system. Chief Miller, a man of imposing stature and unwavering public image, stood at a podium in the central briefing room, his face grim. He spoke of restructuring, of optimizing resources, and of prioritizing high-profile cases to better serve the city's populace and improve the department's public standing. Ethan felt a familiar knot tighten in his stomach. Such announcements often meant sweeping changes that rarely favored quiet diligence over flashy efficiency. As the chief droned on, Ethan's gaze drifted to the stack of files sitting on Captain Thorne's desk. They were marked with a distinctive faded red stamp. Nightingale Murders, active. The notorious Shadow Killer case. A chill, colder than the precinct's air conditioning, ran down Ethan's spine. This was it. The Shadow Killer case had plagued the city for years, a series of seemingly unrelated homicides linked only by their brutal precision and the killer's ghostly elusiveness. It was the department's most embarrassing failure, a dark stain on its record, a wound that refused to heal. Countless task forces had been formed, millions spent. And yet, the killer remained a phantom. Public trust had eroded, and the victims' families lived in a perpetual state of unresolved grief. Chief Miller's voice, now sharper, cut through Ethan's thoughts. "Effective immediately," he declared, his gaze sweeping across the assembled officers. "The Shadow Killer investigation is hereby officially declared a cold case. All active resources will be reallocated. The files will be transferred to archives for permanent shelving." A collective gasp, swiftly stifled, rippled through the room. Officers exchanged glances, some relieved, others visibly deflated. Captain Thorne, Ethan's direct superior, stood beside the chief, his expression stoic, betraying nothing. Thorne was a by-the-book officer, career-focused, whose loyalty lay firmly with departmental efficiency and public perception. He was respected for his competence, but few knew the quiet ambition that drove him. He was a Type B antagonist, capable of misunderstanding and dismissiveness, but not malicious intent. "We cannot afford," Thorne stated, stepping forward, his voice clear and devoid of emotion, "to dwell on lost causes. Our resources are finite. Our focus must be forward, on solvable cases, on rebuilding trust. To continue pursuing this phantom would be an indulgence, a disservice to the living." He paused, his eyes briefly sweeping over Ethan's desk, a subtle, almost imperceptible scoff in his tone. "Some may find it difficult to let go, to stop sifting through the ashes of old failures. But sentimentality has no place in effective policing." Ethan felt a deep, profound affront. It wasn't just the shelving of the case, it was the public dismissal of the victims, the coldness of Thorne's words, the thinly veiled mockery of anyone who, like Ethan, dared to invest emotional energy in the forgotten. It was a sense of personal failure, not for anything he had done, but for what he represented: the quiet, meticulous pursuit of justice, regardless of public opinion or departmental priorities. The Shadow Killer case files, now officially dead, were to be transferred to his desk for final archiving, a bureaucratic tombstone for the department's most embarrassing failure. He had secretly studied them for years, late into the night, piecing together fragments, feeling an inexplicable connection to the victims, their forgotten stories echoing in his mind. Now, they were officially relegated to oblivion. Devastation washed over Ethan. He felt a profound sense of injustice, a crushing helplessness. The system, the very institution he served, was betraying its duty to the forgotten. His first instinct was to follow orders, to simply file the case away, to retreat further into his quiet corner. What was the point? Thorne's words had cut deep. Sentimentality had no place. Fighting the system, arguing for a case that had been officially cold-cased, seemed futile. He imagined the further ridicule, the archivist haze, still playing detective jibes. He even considered giving up his quirky interest in cold cases, putting away his worn notebook, burying that part of himself. It seemed safer, easier, to conform. But the dismissal of the victims, the casual coldness of Thorne's pronouncement, and the burning injustice of the unsolved murders ignited a dormant spark of defiance within him. He closed his eyes for a moment, and suddenly, small, unnoticed details he'd logged in his notebook years ago from early reports of the Nightingale murders, the Shadow Killer's initial victims, resurfaced with uncanny clarity. The odd stain pattern on victim number 3's table, the peculiar, almost rehearsed phrase in that nervous neighbor's witness statement. Details he had dismissed as quirks, as random anomalies. Now, they seemed to pulsate with a new, urgent significance. He felt a moral imperative, a duty to the forgotten, a burning need to see justice served, even if he had to pursue it in the shadows. He was sitting at his desk later that day, the cold case files stacked before him, each one a testament to unsolved pain. The chief and Captain Thorne had left, satisfied with their decisive action. The squad room was mostly empty, the remnants of celebratory coffee cups and discarded paper scattered like forgotten ambitions. Ethan picked up the lead file for the Nightingale murders. His fingers, usually so precise, trembled slightly as he opened it. The faces of the victims stared up at him from faded photographs, ordinary people, ripped from their lives, their stories unfinished. He began the archiving process, methodically scanning documents, labeling folders, and logging each item into the digital system. He reached the personal effects inventory for victim number 1, a young woman named Clara Jennings, a librarian. The inventory listed mundane items: a wallet, keys, a worn paperback book. But then, almost at the bottom of the list, a line caught his eye. Small worn charm, circular, silver-plated, with an unusual etched pattern. He cross-referenced it with the crime scene photos. Yes, there it was, barely visible in one of the close-ups of Clara's hand. A tiny, dull gleam. The initial forensic report had dismissed it as a generic trinket, no evidential value. But as Ethan looked closer, his unique pattern recognition ability flared to life. The etched pattern wasn't generic. It was a series of interlocking, almost geometric spirals, faintly resembling a stylized bird. He had seen something similar, where he pulled out his worn leather notebook, flipping through pages of scribbled observations, obscure facts, and forgotten details. He found a note from 2 years ago, a fleeting observation he'd jotted down while reviewing an unrelated cold case, a burglary gone wrong. Suspect B, observed wearing a silver pendant with intricate spiral etching. Rare craftsmanship. He dismissed it then, but now, a chilling connection began to form. The Nightingale connection in the case name, a bird, the geometric stain, a pattern, the peculiar phrase, a subtle, almost mechanical repetition. His mind raced, connecting the dots that no one else had seen. The small, worn charm was identical to the pendant from that old, unrelated burglary. The stain pattern from victim number 3's living room table wasn't random. It was a distinctive geometric symbol, almost a signature, that had been described in a very old, obscure police bulletin about a series of unsolved art thefts from decades ago, where the thieves left a similar mark. And the peculiar phrase in the witness statement from victim number 2's neighbor wasn't just nervous colloquialism. It was a specific, archaic saying, almost a proverb, that he had once heard used in a documentary about a reclusive, artistic cult that had disbanded years ago. The Shadow Killer case was not cold. It was pulsating with unrevealed connections, threads woven through seemingly disparate crimes, stretching across decades and different types of offenses. The killer wasn't just a random murderer. They were a meticulous, pattern-driven individual, leaving subtle signatures that only a mind like Ethan's could detect. This discovery was undeniable. It was a revelation that hit him with the force of a physical blow. He could not return to his quiet life, to the comfort of the archives. He had found the unseen thread, and it led directly to the heart of the monster. He had to investigate, knowing that pursuing this truth would put him directly against the established department, against Captain Thorne's pragmatic dismissals, and against the very forces that had mocked his quiet skills. The weight of the unsolved had become the catalyst for his transformation. The declaration that the Shadow Killer case was officially cold hung over the Midtown precinct like a shroud, stifling hope and cementing despair. But for Officer Ethan Hayes, it was a call to arms. The realization that the killer left subtle, interconnected signatures, the engraved charm, the peculiar phrase, the geometric stain ignited a fire within him. He couldn't let it rest. Not now. His desk, once a mere archiving station, became his command center, shrouded in the long, lonely hours of the night shift. Ethan understood the futility of working officially on a case declared closed by Chief Miller and Captain Thorne. The department had moved on, its gaze fixed on more solvable crimes and public image. But the victims, the silent echoes in the cold case files, demanded justice. Ethan began his clandestine investigation, using his free time, working under the radar. He meticulously re-examined every scrap of information from the Nightingale murders. cross-referencing details in his worn notebook with digital archives, searching for the slightest anomaly. The precinct, usually buzzing with activity, became a hushed labyrinth after dark, its empty corridors amplifying the quiet urgency of his quest. He knew he couldn't do this alone. His unique skill, while powerful, lacked formal validation and access to specialized resources. He needed someone who could understand the unconventional, someone who wouldn't dismiss his hunches as mere eccentricities. His mind immediately went to Dr. Anya Sharma. She was a legend, whispered about in hushed tones around the department, a brilliant forensic psychologist, a trailblazer in criminal profiling, whose methods were deemed unconventional by the old guard. She had been quietly dismissed from the force years ago, a casualty of a previous chief's traditionalist agenda, leaving behind a reputation for uncanny insights but a trail of raised eyebrows. She was ostracized, yes, but Ethan sensed in her a kindred spirit, a mind that saw beyond the obvious. Finding Dr. Sharma wasn't difficult, but approaching her was. Her private practice was discreet, tucked away in a quiet brownstone in a leafy, academic part of the city. Ethan stood outside her office for 10 minutes, rehearsing his opening lines, the awkwardness of his nature warring with the burning necessity of his mission. He was an officer seeking help from a disgraced professional, a quiet nobody approaching a brilliant, misunderstood mind. He finally pushed open the heavy oak door. Dr. Sharma's office was surprisingly warm, filled with books and a scent of calming herbal tea. Dr. Sharma herself was a woman in her late 40s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through him, and a composed demeanor that masked a keen intellect. "Officer Hayes, isn't it?" she said, her voice smooth but direct, her gaze unnervingly perceptive. "I don't get many visitors from Midtown anymore, especially not from cold case archives." Ethan's carefully constructed opening speech crumbled. He stammered, initially trying to obscure his true intentions with vague references to academic interest and statistical anomalies. He brought a single, critical piece of evidence from the Nightingale cold case file, a high-resolution scan of the peculiar geometric stain from victim number 3's table. I came across this," he said, pushing the image across her polished desk. "It was dismissed as an ordinary spill, but it feels off." Dr. Sharma peered at the image, her brow furrowing. She pulled out a magnifying glass, examined it from different angles. "It's unusual, yes," she conceded, "but forensics confirmed no chemical properties, no organic residue. It appears to be nothing more than a faint discoloration in the wood, a random pattern." She looked up, a hint of skepticism in her eyes. "Why does this particular spill concern you, Officer?" Ethan knew this was it. He had to show her. He swallowed hard. "Because it's not a spill. Dr. Sharma," he said, his voice gaining a quiet intensity. "And it's not random. It's a precise symbol. A signature." He pulled out his worn notebook, flipping to the page where he'd scribbled the details of the obscure police bulletin about the old art thefts. "This stain, it's the exact mark left by the artisan thief, a notorious art criminal from the 70s. Their victims were wealthy art collectors, and they always left this symbol, etched or stained, as a calling card." He pointed to a small, faded diagram he'd drawn in his notebook, matching the geometric pattern. The official report dismissed it because the artisan thief was thought to have died decades ago, and this case is a homicide, not an art theft. Dr. Sharma leaned back, her expression shifting from skepticism to profound intrigue. Her eyes, which had initially dismissed the stain, now saw the undeniable correlation Ethan presented. He didn't boast, didn't posture. He simply laid out the facts, the raw, unconventional connections his mind had made, compelled by the sheer necessity of proving his insight. But that's an art theft case. Decades ago, she mused aloud, her mind already racing, connecting the seemingly disparate threads. And the shadow killer is a contemporary serial murderer. The link is audacious. Audacious, but logical, Ethan countered, his voice firm. The charming pendant from victim number 1, Clara Jennings. The librarian was a rare, artisan-crafted piece linked to a 2-year-old burglary. The peculiar, archaic phrase used by victim number 2's neighbor wasn't a colloquialism. It's from a reclusive artistic cult's forgotten scripture. The killer isn't just a murderer, Dr. Sharma. They're an artist, a collector. And these aren't just homicides. They're a performance. Dr. Sharma stared at him, a dawning realization in her eyes. She saw how he connected seemingly disparate clues: the coin, the stain, a specific choice of words in old witness testimony into a coherent, chilling narrative. This wasn't guesswork. It was a unique form of pattern recognition that had eluded entire task forces. She saw the brilliance in his quirks, the precision in his obsessions. He had a gift. She was the primary witness to the unveiling of Ethan's extraordinary observational and pattern recognition skills. Her skepticism dissolved, replaced by a fierce intellectual curiosity and a grudging admiration. Meanwhile, back at the precinct, Detective Mark Reynolds was a man driven by ambition and a finely tuned sense of departmental politics. He was well-connected, charismatic in a superficial way, and ruthless in his pursuit of recognition. Reynolds had been one of the lead detectives on the Shadow Killer Task Force before it was cold-cased, and he secretly resented any outsider attention on big cases, especially from someone as unassuming as Ethan. He prided himself on being the best, and any suggestion that someone else, particularly Archivist Hayes, could see something he missed was a personal affront. Reynolds had noticed Ethan lingering near the cold case archives, an area he himself rarely bothered with. He'd seen the worn notebook, the quiet intensity, the furtive glances Ethan cast around before pulling files. He also noticed Ethan making unusual inquiries to precinct clerks, subtly asking about old art theft reports or unusual linguistics. Reynolds's instincts, though fueled by jealousy, were sharp enough to register a potential threat. He watched Ethan with a predatory gleam in his eye, a growing suspicion that the quiet officer was dabbling in something beyond his pay grade, something that could either lead to a big break which Reynolds intended to steal credit for, or a massive departmental embarrassment. Driven by envy and a desire to control the narrative or perhaps to steal the credit if Ethan found anything, Reynolds began to actively undermine Ethan. He started spreading rumors in the squad room, subtle at first, then more overt. "Hayes, you seem to have a knack for these old cases. Haven't you noticed?" he'd murmur to other detectives over coffee. "Always buried in those dusty cold cases. Probably talking to himself now." He hinted at Ethan's obsessive behavior and unprofessional conduct to Captain Thorne, framing Ethan's meticulousness as a sign of instability. One morning, Ethan found his access to the department's obscure historical databases, which he used for his cold case research, suddenly blocked, citing system maintenance. He knew it was Reynolds. Later that day, as Ethan walked by a group of officers, Reynolds loudly scoffed. "Look, it's cold case Hayes still chasing ghosts. Archivists, don't trip over your own theories. We need you to sort the mail." The taunt was sharp, designed to humiliate, to remind Ethan of his place. This overt hostility, this constant drip of ridicule, only fueled Ethan's resolve. Reynolds was confirming his suspicions, providing the opposition he needed to push forward. The whispers in the archives were growing louder, evolving into a silent war for the truth, with Ethan at its center. The quiet war Ethan Hayes had been waging in the shadowed corners of the Midtown precinct was about to burst into the harsh glare of public scrutiny. A new, chilling message, scrawled in an archaic script on the wall of the city's oldest art gallery, a gallery that had, decades ago, featured works acquired from victims of the very artisan thief Ethan had linked to the Nightingale murders, shook the city to its core. It was a cryptic taunt, a macabre poem hinting at a new victim and a twisted appreciation for art. Overnight, the notorious Shadow Killer case, officially cold just weeks prior, roared back to life. Chief Miller, under immense public pressure and facing a media frenzy, quickly announced the formation of a new, high-profile task force. The unit would be led by none other than Detective Mark Reynolds, the ambitious and self-serving officer who had relentlessly mocked Ethan. Captain Thorne, ever the pragmatist focused on public perception, was appointed to oversee the task force, his stern gaze a constant reminder of the stakes. The arena was now the active investigation itself, a complex, high-stakes hunt for a killer who reveled in their elusiveness, and where Ethan, though officially sidelined, had to use his unique insights to influence the investigation without being credited, or worse, discovered. This is the very case he was mocked for dwelling on, now at the forefront, demanding resolution. Ethan, despite his critical insights, was deliberately kept out of the main investigation loop by Reynolds and Thorne. He must operate in the shadows, sharing crucial insights indirectly, e.g., anonymously sending tips to Sharma, who then discovers them, or subtly altering evidence reports to nudge the task force in the right direction. The pressure of this clandestine operation, combined with the killer's increasing confidence, creates immense isolation. His days became a delicate dance of subterfuge. He'd spend his official hours diligently filing reports, acting the part of the unassuming archivist. But his nights, and every spare moment, were dedicated to the Shadow Killer. He frequented Dr. Anya Sharma's office, her brownstone becoming his covert war room. He'd bring her meticulously compiled notes, subtle observations from news reports, and digital copies of overlooked forensic details from old files that he'd managed to accidentally stumble upon during his archiving duties. He anonymously sent tips to Sharma, disguised as citizen concerns or unsolicited fan mail from an avid true crime reader, which she would then discover and present to the task force, subtly nudging them in the right direction. He even resorted to subtly altering evidence reports, minor, almost imperceptible changes that, to his unique mind, highlighted key connections Reynolds and his team were missing, nudging them towards a specific conclusion without them realizing his hand in it. Dr. Sharma became his crucial conduit, a bridge between his unorthodox genius and the rigid structure of the department. She would sift through his cryptic hints, translating his unique pattern recognition into actionable intelligence for the task force. She wrestled with Thorne, arguing for the validity of her hunches, which were, in reality, Ethan's deductions, fighting to get the task force to consider lines of inquiry that defied conventional wisdom. It was a frustrating, high-stakes game of whispers and hidden manipulations. The Shadow Killer, emboldened by the renewed attention and the apparent ineptitude of the police, escalated their game. Days after the gallery taunt, a new victim was discovered, a reclusive artist, found in a staged tableau, a macabre masterpiece of death. Alongside the body, the killer left a chilling public challenge, a coded message in a widely circulated art magazine, declaring their next exhibition would be held in exactly 72 hours, hinting at a prominent public landmark. The city plunged into a state of panic. The police department was thrust into a frantic race against time, a direct response to the killer's audacious deadline. This external clock amplified the tension for Ethan. He knew the killer's patterns better than anyone, could almost feel their next move. He had to guide the task force without revealing his hand, without risking his career and freedom. The pressure of this clandestine operation was immense. Every minute counted. Meanwhile, Detective Reynolds, feeling the immense pressure of the case and the public's demands for a quick resolution, grew increasingly suspicious of how new breaks always seemed to align with the unconventional insights coming from Dr. Sharma, insights that felt eerily similar to some of Ethan's dismissed theories. He noticed Ethan's unusual hours, his continued presence in the cold case archives even after they'd been officially closed, his furtive conversations with Dr. Sharma. Reynolds' ambition twisted into paranoia. He started a quiet internal investigation into Ethan, digging into his past, checking his phone records, even subtly interrogating precinct clerks about Ethan's activities. "Hayes, you seem to have a knack for these old cases, don't you?" Reynolds casually remarked one afternoon. His eyes narrowed, a predatory glint in them. "Almost like you're expecting something." Ethan felt a cold dread. Reynolds was closing in. This added another ticking clock to Ethan's already impossible mission. He risked exposure, career ruin, and potentially even criminal charges for obstructing an official investigation if discovered before the killer is caught. The labyrinth the killer had created was complex, but the one Reynolds was building around Ethan was equally terrifying. The hunter's labyrinth had closed in. Ethan, the unseen thread, was now both hunter and hunted, with time rapidly running out for him and for the city. The city plunged into a frenzied chaos. News channels broadcast live from every street corner, their reporters breathless, their voices laced with panic. The shadow killer had struck again, brazenly, leaving a new victim, a renowned art critic in the heart of the city's most exclusive gallery district. The crime scene was a grotesque tableau, designed for maximum public impact, a final, chilling performance. Sirens wailed incessantly, a mournful chorus cutting through the night, as police units converged, responding to the latest atrocity. The task force, led by Detective Reynolds, was overwhelmed, their faces grim, their movements frantic, caught in the killer's macabre dance. In his perpetually shadowed corner of the Midtown precinct, oblivious to the cacophony outside, Officer Ethan Hayes was hunched over a map, his world reduced to the illuminated circle of his desk lamp. The map was not of city streets, but of the killer's mind. A sprawling network of meticulously noted details, the peculiar geometric stain, the rare foreign coin, the archaic witness phrase, the specific pattern of cuts on the victims, the subtle symbolism in the killer's taunts. His glasses were pushed up onto his forehead, his hair disheveled, but his eyes, sharp and intense, darted across the data, connecting the unseen threads that no one else could perceive. His movements were sharp, precise. He wasn't guessing, he was calculating. His right hand scribbled furiously in his worn notebook, translating abstract patterns into tangible leads. His left hand moved across a digital overlay of the city, marking potential routes, exit strategies, and future targets with an uncanny accuracy. He could almost feel the killer's pulse, their twisted logic unfolding before him. The killer's latest cryptic message, delivered via a series of online riddles posted on an obscure art form, had just been cracked by Dr. Sharma's team, confirming his deepest suspicions the killer was planning not just another murder, but a final, public spectacle, a grand finale designed to cement their legend. The location. It's not random, Ethan murmured to himself, his voice a low growl, barely audible above the distant sirens. He traced a line on the map. It's a specific confluence, the old clock tower. The first victim lived near there. The second had a studio nearby. The third passed through that square daily. It's the axis, the center of their universe. He remembered the precise angle of the geometric stain on the table, matching it to the angle of a shadow cast by the clock tower at dawn. The foreign coin, he realized, was not just rare. It depicted a specific astronomical alignment that correlated with the killer's prior crime dates. And the archaic phrase in the witness statement. It was a forgotten invocation from an ancient cult that worshipped time and celestial events, hinting at a final hour. He snatched up his phone, his fingers flying across the keypad, a rapid series of calculations and deductions forming in his mind that seemed illogical to anyone else, but are crystal clear to him. He called Dr. Sharma, his voice urgent, stripped of its usual awkwardness. "Anya, listen to me. The clock tower. Not just the area, but the actual tower. The killer's final performance is at the tower. They're going to use the bell. The last bell of midnight. It's a symbolic execution. A countdown." Dr. Sharma, at the task force's command center, was trying desperately to convince Captain Thorne and Detective Reynolds to consider her unconventional insights. The room was a maelstrom of frantic radio chatter, maps covered in red pins, and harried detectives barking orders. Reynolds, his face tight with stress, dismissed her. "Sharma, stick to your profiles. We're chasing tangible leads, not astrological predictions." Thorne, though less dismissive, was equally skeptical. "Anya, the clock tower is miles away from the last crime scene, and it's guarded. It makes no sense." Just as Ethan relayed his crucial insight, a new, chilling update crackled over the police radio. "All units, be advised. Reports of an active sniper situation near the old Central Park Carousel, civilians in danger. Repeat, sniper situation near Carousel." The Carousel, not the clock tower. It seemed Ethan's deduction was wrong, or too late. Chaos erupted in the command center. "Carousel, all units, divert to Central Park." Reynolds screamed, seizing a radio. Thorne's face went grim. It appeared the killer had not only evaded them, but had executed a diversion, setting a trap for the police. For a moment, it seemed the killer has won, and Ethan's quirky skills are dismissed as a fatal flaw, leading them astray. The scene was full of frantic radio chatter, sirens, and the sounds of struggle. "No, wait!" Ethan's voice, though coming from a phone, cut through the frantic energy in the command center. He had heard the radio update. His mind, instead of panicking, saw the pattern. "It's a diversion. The carousel is a distraction. The killer knows we'd send everyone there. They're moving to the clock tower now. The carousel is on the opposite side of the city. It's part of the performance. The false final hour." His voice was sharp, desperate. "They set up the sniper as a decoy to clear the tower's perimeter. The sniper isn't the killer." Dr. Sharma, her heart pounding, relayed Ethan's frantic warning. "He says it's a diversion. The clock tower. The sniper is a decoy. They're going for the bell." Thorne looked at Reynolds, then back at the map. The carousel was miles away, but the clock tower was indeed more lightly guarded, its perimeter theoretically secure, but vulnerable to a calculated diversion. He suddenly remembered Ethan's initial, dismissed warnings about the killer's artistic and symbolic nature. The pieces began to click into place, a horrifying realization. "He's right," Thorne roared, grabbing a microphone. "All units, hold, do not engage the sniper at the carousel, confirm. Only priority 1 clock tower, Alpha, Beta, Charlie teams, converge on the clock tower now, secure the perimeter, get a sniper on the roof opposite." His command, defying the initial order, sent a shockwave through the command center. Reynolds, caught in the killer's trap, had already dispatched half the force to the carousel. He was yelling into his radio, his face a mask of fury and humiliation. He saw Thorne's desperate change of orders, then heard the frantic reports coming in from the clock tower, confirming Ethan's prediction. Suspect spotted scaling the clock tower, appears to be rigging something to the bell mechanism. The arrogance in Reynolds' face crumbled into raw, bitter acknowledgement of Ethan's genius. He saw the foresight play out in real time, the precision of Ethan's deduction, the monster he'd mocked for so long. He was humiliated, trapped, and exposed. Live on national news. Helicopters hovered over the clock tower, their spotlights cutting through the pre-dawn gloom. Reporters, covering the chaotic manhunt, scrambled to interpret the sudden shift in police focus. One reporter, known for her skepticism of the force, had just been ridiculing the wild goose chase to the carousel. Then, her earpiece crackled with urgent news. Police units were swarming the clock tower, a figure scaling its ancient face. Her skepticism morphed into awe as the oddball officer's theory, relayed by Dr. Sharma, was now being executed. "My God," she whispered into her mic. "It seems the archivist was right." The chief of police, watching from HQ, saw the impossible case, the department's greatest failure, finally being broken. He watched as the silhouette of the shadow killer was cornered atop the clock tower, their elaborate final performance thwarted by a single unseen thread of deduction. He saw the precise execution of Thorne's new orders, based entirely on Ethan's insights. A profound understanding dawned on him. The true value of Ethan's unique skills, so long overlooked, was immeasurable. Minutes later, the killer was captured. Not by a grand tactical maneuver orchestrated by Reynolds, but by the swift, precise action of the teams Thorne had diverted. Acting on Ethan's pinpoint prediction, the killer, a disillusioned architect with a twisted artistic vision, was apprehended just as they were about to trigger the grand finale. The clock tower remained standing, its bells silent, its integrity preserved. The capture, directly facilitated by Ethan's unseen threads of deduction, was his public vindication and triumph. News anchors spoke his name. Officer Ethan Hayes, not with ridicule, but with reverence. The man who had been mocked for his skills. The quiet archivist had solved the toughest case in his department, saving countless lives and finally bringing peace to a city tormented by shadows. The climax was over, but the echoes of his quiet genius would resonate for years to come. The city, which had just hours ago been a frantic stage for the Shadow Killer's final act, was now bathed in the calm, pale light of dawn. The capture of the notorious killer atop the clock tower sent a collective sigh of relief rippling through every street, every home. But within the Midtown precinct, the atmosphere was a mix of exhaustion, triumph, and a subtle, undeniable shift in power dynamics. Officer Ethan Hayes, his face smudged with fatigue but his eyes clear and resolute, stood quietly to the side as the media descended, hungry for details. The fallout for Detective Mark Reynolds was immediate and severe. His face, still pale with humiliation from the night's events, was plastered across every news channel, juxtaposed with reports of his misjudgment and the daring, unconventional deduction that had saved the day. The internal investigation into his attempts to obstruct Ethan's access and spread rumors had been swift. Captain Thorne, now seeing clearly the depths of Reynolds' ambition and his willingness to undermine a colleague, had taken decisive action. Reynolds faced professional repercussions that far outweighed his previous successes. He was stripped of his detective badge and demoted to a desk job in a less prestigious, highly bureaucratic unit, effectively sidelined from any meaningful investigative work. His once flawless reputation was irrevocably tarnished. His career trajectory, which he had so meticulously crafted, had crashed and burned. The man who thrived on public adulation now withered under public scorn, his downfall a stark, fitting consequence of his arrogance and petty jealousy. Captain Thorne, a man of rigid protocol and a deep-seated belief in the department's image, was visibly humbled. The chief's commendation of Ethan's actions, broadcast live from HQ, had been a clear directive. Thorne, ever pragmatic, understood the need for public reconciliation. The next morning, in a precinct-wide briefing, Thorne stood before his officers, his voice firm but laced with a humility few had ever witnessed. "Last night," he began, his gaze briefly meeting Ethan's, "we averted a catastrophe, and we did so, not through conventional means, but through the extraordinary insight of one of our own." He paused, taking a deep breath. Officer Ethan Hayes, his meticulous observations, his dedication to the cold case, and his uncanny ability to see patterns where others saw chaos, were instrumental. He saw the truth when the rest of us were looking in the wrong direction. Thorne's eyes swept across the room, lingering on Reynolds, who stared at his shoes. "I admit," Thorne continued, his voice steady, "I was skeptical. I questioned his methods. I misjudged his abilities. That was my error. And I publicly acknowledge it. Officer Hayes acted with courage and integrity, even when he was doubted. He is a credit to this department." It was a public statement of acknowledgement, a rare admission of fault from Captain Thorne, marking the beginning of a process of genuine respect and mentorship towards Ethan. The rigid, by-the-book captain had been forced to confront his own biases, and in doing so, had found a new appreciation for unconventional genius. The city, exhausted but grateful, hailed Ethan as a hero. His name, once a quiet murmur in the archives, was now on every headline. He received commendations from the mayor, the chief, and countless civic organizations. Media outlets, once quick to mock his eccentricities, now lined up to interview the architect of silence, the unseen detective. He handled it all with his characteristic quiet demeanor, deflecting praise to Dr. Sharma and the task force, but accepting the recognition with a subtle, internal sense of satisfaction. The most significant reward, however, was not the public accolades, but the profound new opportunity that emerged, days after the killer's capture. Chief Miller, fully aware of the public's restored faith in the department due to Ethan, summoned him to his office. The chief, a shrewd politician as much as a law enforcer, had seen the invaluable asset Ethan represented. "Hayes," the chief began, his voice devoid of its usual bluster, a newfound respect in his tone. "What you did, it was unprecedented. You saw what no one else could. Your skills are unique. And frankly, we need them." He leaned forward, a serious expression on his face. "I'm offering you a new position, a new unit, effective immediately. You will head the newly formed Cold Case and Pattern Analysis Unit. You'll have full access to resources, a dedicated team, and the autonomy to pursue cases that fit your particular methods." Ethan felt a surge of emotion he rarely allowed himself. This was more than just a promotion. It was a validation of his entire being. This opportunity was not just about status. It allowed him to fully utilize his unique skills and obsessive attention to detail, transforming his perceived weaknesses into strengths. He would no longer be confined to archiving the dead. He would be actively breathing life into them, using his mind to solve the unsolvable. He envisioned a team of quiet, meticulous individuals, perhaps others like himself, who found patterns in chaos, who saw the unseen threads. Later that week, as the precinct slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy, Ethan had a quiet, meaningful conversation with Dr. Anya Sharma. Her office, once a refuge for the disgraced, now hummed with a renewed sense of purpose. Her phone buzzed constantly with calls from other departments, seeking her unconventional expertise. "We did it, Anya," Ethan said, a rare, faint smile touching his lips. He was sitting in her office, the aroma of herbal tea filling the air. Dr. Sharma smiled, her sharp eyes twinkling. "No, Ethan, you did it. I just translated your mind. It's truly extraordinary. You see the world in a way no one else does." "And you believed me," Ethan countered, looking at her directly. "When no one else would, when everyone was so quick to dismiss me, to mock my quirks." He paused, reflecting. "It hurt, you know? All those years of being the archivist, the cold case Hayes, the feeling of being invisible, or worse, ridiculed for the very thing that was my strength." "I know it did, Ethan," Dr. Sharma said gently. "But sometimes, the greatest gifts are born from the deepest wounds. That pain, that isolation. It forced you to hone your skills in secret, to rely solely on your own perception. It forged you." "It fueled me," Ethan conceded, a flicker of that past bitterness in his voice. "Every sneer from Reynolds, every dismissive wave from Thorne, it pushed me further into those files, made me dig deeper. I wanted to prove them wrong. But more than that," he continued, his voice softening, "I wanted to prove it to myself, that my way of seeing things mattered, that these patterns weren't just in my head. And now they know," Dr. Sharma stated simply. "The whole city knows. The chief knows. Thorne knows." She gestured towards his new departmental commendation certificate, proudly displayed on her wall. "Your true strength lay in embracing your uniqueness, Ethan. Not in conforming, but in believing in what only you could see." He nodded, a sense of deep peace settling over him. The chief offered me a new unit, cold case and pattern analysis. He looked at her, his eyes serious. I want you on my team, Anya. As lead consultant, I need your insights, your ability to translate my patterns into actionable intelligence. We can build something truly groundbreaking. Find justice for all those forgotten cases. Dr. Sharma's smile widened, a genuine, delighted grin. It would be an honor, Ethan. A genuine honor. Together, we can unlock the silence. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the hum of the city outside a distant lullaby. Ethan, the man who had once been defined by the shadows of the archives, had emerged into the light. Not as a different person, but as the truest version of himself. He had found his place. His quiet demeanor, now seen as a mark of profound concentration rather than awkwardness. The resolution was clear. The city had found its unseen guardian. And Ethan, the architect of silence, had finally found his voice. 3 years later, the Midtown precinct still hummed with the ceaseless rhythm of police work. But its pulse felt different, more attuned, perhaps to the unseen currents that flowed beneath the surface of the city. Officer Ethan Hayes, once a quiet, overlooked figure in the archives, was now a respected and slightly enigmatic figure within its walls. His office, still cluttered with the organized chaos of case files and forensic texts, was no longer a personal refuge, but the command center of the highly successful cold case and pattern analysis unit. His unit had become legendary, solving multiple cold cases that had baffled detectives for decades, and even preventing new crimes by predicting patterns before they fully materialized. Ethan's almost supernatural ability to crack the unsolvable, to connect the disparate, was no longer a subject of mockery but of awe. His slightly disheveled look and perpetual glasses were now seen not as signs of awkwardness, but as marks of profound concentration, the outward manifestation of a mind perpetually sifting through the universe of details. He had found his place, a purpose that resonated with the very core of his being. Dr. Anya Sharma sat opposite him most days, her sharp eyes twinkling as she translated his intricate deductions into actionable strategies for their team. Their dynamic was a seamless blend of his intuitive genius and her methodical expertise. Their dedicated team, a small but fiercely loyal group of analysts and detectives, understood and valued his unique methods, learning to see the world through the same lens of meticulous detail. They were a testament to the power of embracing individuality, a microcosm of the change Ethan had brought to the department. Ethan had not forgotten the mockery, the isolation that had once defined him. It was a scar, but one that now served as a powerful reminder of his journey. As a mandatory act of paying it forward, he established a mentorship program within the department, informally at first, then officially. It was for young, unconventional officers who struggled to fit into the rigid structure, but who possessed unique skills of photographic memory, an uncanny ability to read body language, a knack for languages, or an obsessive eye for detail. He shared his story, not with bitterness, but with a quiet strength, teaching them to trust their instincts, to embrace their quirks as strengths. He became a champion for diversity of thought in policing, ensuring that other Ethans were recognized, nurtured, and utilized, preventing others from suffering the same isolation he had endured. His goal was to build a department where every unique mind found its purpose, where no talent was overlooked. Late one night, as the city lights twinkled outside his office window, a distant hum of urban life replacing the precinct's earlier bustle, Ethan sat at his desk. A complex new cold case file lay open before him, the disappearance of a young tech innovator, a puzzle with no obvious leads. He was hunched over it, just as he had been years ago over the Nightingale murders. But now there was a subtle difference. A faint smile touched his lips, a rare, almost imperceptible curve. He was meticulously drawing connections between seemingly unrelated data points. A half-eaten sandwich forgotten beside him, the worn leather notebook, now filled to the brim with successful deductions and insights, lay open beside him, a silent testament to countless hours of unseen work, of truths unearthed from the shadows. He was the unseen guardian, the quiet genius, forever poring over the details, connecting the threads that bound the universe of crime together. His journey, from being mocked for his perceived oddities to becoming the department's most invaluable asset, was a living testament to the power of embracing one's unique skills and the triumph of the underestimated. The silence that once defined him had become the canvas upon which he painted justice, one meticulous stroke at a time. If this story stirred your heart, if it reminds you that courage can alter destinies, and that light always finds a path even in the deepest darkness, please leave a comment. Share this story with those who need inspiration. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell to never miss our upcoming stories.